In today's video, we are going to analyse these three midfielders and how they can all coexist and give Chelsea different weapons for different games. These are the three teams that we've seen lately. So you got Caicedo and Lavia alongside each other. That was the most recent. Then you've had Caicedo, Enzo and Lavia all in a team. That was the one at the start of the season against Manchester City. And then, of course, you've had Caicedo and Enzo, which was something you saw a lot more when Lavia was injured. The first example of this was in pre-season with Romeo Lavia at the base, Enzo Fernandez as that left centre mid and Gusto as that right centre mid inverting from right back. This was without Caicedo as he was just trying to get some full fitness. But since the Premier League season started, Moises Caicedo has been absolutely pivotal for Chelsea and he cannot be dropped. So he is just a set and forget in this team. So it's more about Romeo Lavia and Enzo Fernandez. Now, after that first game of the season against Manchester City, which we're going to speak about, which had all three of them playing together, we've seen Enzo Fernandez and Caicedo playing alongside each other, but having Gusto invert closer to Caicedo, as you can see by that yellow rectangle, and then Fernandez sort of being that +1 who can join the last line, but also join the midfield line to make a 3-3-4 or a 3-2-5 at times, situationally. And when he came on against Arsenal, we saw exactly what he can bring to the side. Many people see this as a very simple pass, but it's penetrative, it's forward, and it puts Pedro Neto towards goal, where he then makes up his mind for him, going towards goal, taking that momentum, and then taking it in his stride and finishing in the superb manner that he did. So that's what you get from Enzo Fernandez, the forward passing, the creative thinking, the passing empathy to know where players want the ball and to put them in that direction forwards. But how does it look at the minute with Romeo Lavia and Moises Caicedo? Well, Maresca said it exactly himself. With Lavia in there alongside Caicedo, you get a little bit more solidity and those dual winning abilities of the two in there as a pair, which sees Gusto inverting slightly higher up the pitch as a number 8, as you can see in this image. Caicedo and Lavia are really good in transition to defend the ball. They're brilliant at sustaining pressure in the opposition half by trapping teams in. And they're also really good in deep phases of build-up play where they can link up together and start to build through those deeper lines of pressure. And this is an example of exactly what they bring to the side, having these three set the counter-pressing net so that they can keep teams pushed in their own half. And this is what I spoke about in my last video. So if you haven't seen that already, do go and check that out to understand what it is about setting these counter-pressing nets that Romeo Lavia and Moises Caicedo help with so much in terms of sustaining possession for Chelsea. It's that extra dueling capabilities that Romeo Lavia brings to Chelsea over Enzo Fernandez in that midfield alongside Moises Caicedo. But what about when we had all three of them playing against Manchester City? Now, the main problem with this is, as you can see, you've got the three in midfield, but then during build-up, you've still got that sort of spread out back four, and Enzo basically has to operate as a number 10 in the half space, going between the number 8 and the number 10 position, which then leaves that final line of pressure with a 4v3 for Manchester City, Chelsea not able to pin the defensive line back with 4 men and overload that back line, because Enzo is between the two lines. So we spoke about the different profiles that these players give Enzo Maresca, but how can Maresca use these profiles effectively to help Chelsea in their games? Let's take a look on the tactics board.
Now we're on the tactics board, we're going to just have a quick look at basically what you get from each of the midfield pairings, or trio if you want to call it that, but the ones that we've just spoke about just a minute ago. The one thing I do want to point out straight away is that these three players, they can coexist, and the options we're about to say is actually perfect to sort of analyze what each pairing gives you, how you can rotate their minutes. You're talking about 3 players for essentially 2 positions, right? And we've seen that with Enzo coming off the bench for Lavia, and even Lavia coming off the bench for Enzo when he was coming back from injury, etc., etc. And you've even seen all 3 together. So there's game states where these 3 players, they're all going to get the minutes they deserve. Caicedo is undroppable at this point, so at the minute it's going to be Lavia and Enzo who are sharing the minutes. But there's no issue with this as long as they're playing a good amount of minutes. The only time this would become an issue is if one of them ended up completely sort of sidelined and only in the B team, if that's what you want to call it. But I don't think that's going to be the case with this sort of trio. I think there's a lot of different games where you can use this trio and make sort of flexible changes to help you against the opposition. And we're going to talk about why. So I think that the minute management of these 3 is very important to touch on. And we're going to do that now. So obviously we've got what we've been using lately. This 2 in the pivot here, Lavia and Caicedo. What you get from these 2, you know you get that extra little bit of defensive solidity. Solidity. I was going to say solidarity, but solidity. And what you get is when that ball is sort of lost in these central areas, you have two players rather than just one in Caicedo who are really good at sort of covering ground quickly, getting the ball and winning it. And as we spoke about in my last video about the Arsenal game, with someone like Cucurella as well, and even Gusto, you have players that can set these little nets around the ball and counter press. We call them like counter pressing nets to win that ball back in dangerous areas. And having both Lavia and Caicedo, it gives you that extra bit of protection that we all know that having both of those duelists gives you. Lavia a little bit more defensively able, a little bit better physically, mobile to get up and down the pitch and sort of help in the press as well. Because sometimes you sort of see Chelsea pressing with Lavia higher up as well, sort of in that diamondy shape that we've seen, where it's almost like a sort of like this in the press, with Lavia sort of applying more pressure, a bit like Ndidi did last year for Leicester. But and the other good thing that we can mention about Lavia and Caicedo is in deep build-up, when Chelsea are sort of building up in that split centre backs, double pivot, almost like this is frozen. So give that a second. But when you set up in there we go, in this sort of shape, almost that De Zerbi-esque that we talk about, sort of like this. These two in the middle, especially Lavia, you have that extra bit of press resistance in terms of if that ball comes into his feet, he can control that ball, go on the turn, and he's really good if when players are applying pressure to Chelsea in their own half at keeping the ball, recycling play, and using it to get out from the back here. I don't know why this tactics board is playing up, not responding properly, but we'll try to proceed. So that's what Lavia gives you there. However, what you do find with Lavia, it's nothing on Lavia, but when Chelsea are in that sort of more, you could say, that shape where, if we just put it how it was earlier, where they're in this sort of shape, and they're sustaining pressure, which again, something they do really well, setting those counter-pressing nets. But this, and if they're holding the ball in these sort of positions, and they're moving it around the back, and then they're coming into the pivot, and they're trying to play it through, and there might be the odd little pass into here, and then they'll sort of, it will. What I'm trying to say is that penetrative pass from this area of the pitch is slightly lacking, and it's not because of their qualities, but it's just their sort of play style. It's more their play style is to spray passes in when there's a bit more space opening up, sort of in those deeper transitions. When you get into this area of the pitch, that's where you then need somebody who can start pulling the strings, and that is your Enzo Fernandez type. We saw this against Arsenal when he come on. Again, we spoke about this just a minute ago, but that ability to just even simple passes, but forward passes to encourage these players to attack and almost force them on their way just by giving them a direct pass that they have to go and do something with. And having Fernandez in this area of the pitch, that is what you get from him that you don't really get from Caicedo and Lavia. He's just a bit more of a risk taker with his passes. He will look for those sort of over the top balls. He got an assist for Argentina last night with a beautiful little chip ball over the top to Lautaro Martinez. This is the extra bit that Enzo gives you. And in games where you're going to be setting up against the lower block, someone like Enzo in the midfield, in a deeper pivot, in a similar way that they've been doing with Gusto or one of the fullbacks pushing high, I do think that is the answer in terms of how to break down lower blocks on a more consistent basis. However, that being said, against certain teams, so if we now talk about the games that we've got coming up, you've got Tottenham and you've got Villa in the next few. You have also got Leicester, and I can't remember the other one. I think there's another one that I sort of tweeted out about how they should rotate the minutes. Against Leicester and a few of the other sides that don't have that same sort of capacity to duel in the middle of the park, I think you can get away with having Caicedo as long as Gusto and Cucurella or James, whoever, are ready to almost make up for that little bit of lacking defensive ability of Enzo in transition. I still think Enzo's good defending side to side in terms of dueling and winning ground duels in this area of the pitch. But I do think going up and down and even in transition when he gets sort of on the turn and and players manage to spin him round, I think that's where he can suffer a bit. But what was we going to say? Against Tottenham and against Villa, you're talking about teams that have Amadou Onana for Villa, and then Tottenham, they're just a very compact, sort of well-oiled side in terms of how they press. They're very, very intense. So definitely against Tottenham, I would say that you're looking to play this pivot, because every little loose ball that you can win in the middle of the park is going to be big. And the extra that you have in there is a bit more defensive protection, but also just that ability to win those few extra duels that you might not win with Enzo in there, I think is a massive factor in this game to allow you to almost take a little bit of control, a bit like how they did against Arsenal at times, winning those second balls, dropping in and around this sort of central area. Same as against Villa. I think that's the best way to go about it. But and then obviously in those games, Enzo can come from the bench a little bit later on and maybe provide that little bit of creative spark that's needed, as he did against Arsenal. In the other games, as I said, I would be looking to have Enzo dictate play, have him in the game early, have him the guy getting all the touches, Caicedo doing his job box to box, or just roaming in this central area, winning second duels and being part of the team in that sense. But Enzo just being able to spray and connect the dots and really just add that little bit of creativity, especially when you think they're going to be camped in this area for a long period of time. Enzo's going to sort of have that ability to spray passes and look through the lines a little bit more than, say, a Lavia would. So I think the important thing to take into account with this is as much, and that's another thing. You could easily do this at some point. Caicedo's in too good a form right now, but that's not to say this will never ever be seen. And this gives you a good mix of everything as well, because you have that sort of deep press resistance of Lavia. That Enzo would probably be a little bit more sort of. The only thing here would be who has the carrying responsibility. Lavia, in my opinion, is the best of the three as a carrier if he is given that license, but he's also, alongside Enzo, wouldn't quite have that either. So it would be interesting to see that sense. But I do quite like the idea of seeing this at some point or another. Just in rotation to give minutes away and to give Caicedo a rest, because he's just so important right now. And this is a good pivot. Like I say, it's a good balanced pivot. Gives you a bit of everything. You still have the dual winning of Lavia. He's a bit more protective for someone like Enzo as well in terms of positioning, and it would work. So with this, I think the most important thing to take from this video is these three can easily coexist. They can easily be sort of used by Maresca in different ways in order to sort of control games and use those little tactical tweaks that we've seen Maresca do already in order to give Chelsea the upper hand in games. If Chelsea need a controller, you've got Enzo. If Chelsea need a bit more defensive solidity, you've got Lavia. If you want to win second balls, you go for this. And if you really want to, you can even go for Enzo into the team, which would see something like this. Now, I'm not a big advocate of this because it basically means Enzo starting in the 10, but it's more of a midfield 3. And it would essentially mean that Gusto, or whoever is overlapping, Palmer is coming inside from the right into here. What this does mean that you give up is that ability to pin the opposition player in this area of the pitch. If you want to know more about that, go and check out my last video on why fullbacks are becoming the most important players at elite clubs right now. And that'll explain everything as to why I'm not the biggest fan of these three playing together, unless very specific circumstances like that Manchester City game basically come around. If you've enjoyed this video, please do drop a like. All questions about this midfield trio and any other videos you want to see, do let me know. Leave them in the comments down below. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys next time.